Hello, everyone. Welcome to the event today. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. We're just going to let some people join. So thank you for joining. Those of you who are already here, thank you for being early. So 3 more minutes. In the meantime, those of you who are here, I have a favor to ask you. Can you, when you go to your chat, can you please change your settings so that you're messaging panelists and attendees? That way we can all see what you're adding to the chat, not just attendees. So, if you can please share now where you're joining us from, that'd be great. We'd love to see where you're joining us from. So once again, thank you all for coming. We'll start in about 3 minutes. Mike is from Vancouver. I am from Burnaby. London, wow, that's amazing. From Paris. Hi, Sabrina from Paris, that's amazing. From Richmond, that's wonderful. UBC Vancouver, great. From Bowen Island, awesome. So okay, once again, those of you who are adding messages to the chat, just make sure your setting is to panelists and attendees so that we can all see your chat messages and not just the panelists. I know it's annoying that Zoom has that default function to only message the panelists, but it'd be great for us to all see what you're commenting on. So take a second now to change the chat setting, please. So for those who just joined, I saw 4 more people join a second ago. We're just sharing where everyone is joining from. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. So please type in where you're coming from or where you're joining us from. And make sure that you have selected panelists and attendees. From Seattle, awesome. Great, Vancouver. Nice, Gerald, near the VPL Central Branch. That's where we work. So 1 more minute and we'll get started. It's a beautiful day here in Vancouver today. Does not feel like winter anymore. I bet Los Angeles feels even warmer. Hi, Laura. Okay, we're gonna get started now. I'm gonna show you the face behind that voice. That's me. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jorge Amigo. I'm the head of cultural programming for the Vancouver Public Library, and I'm gonna be your host for today. First, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of this land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years, and what it means for you to be here. So if you're joining us from another part of the country or another country, there is a great resource that I will share in the chat so you can learn about the land where you live. And actually, it's my colleague Jen who is going to be helping us with the chat and answering your questions and putting links there. So please take a second to say hi to Jen on the chat. So tonight's event is all about learning how to become an AR creator. So I want to encourage all of you to be very active in the chat and ask questions so that we have a little dialogue going on. And on that note, I want to remind you something about the chat. The default Zoom setting is that your chats are only visible to the panelists. So let's take a second now to change that chat setting. So go to that little blue button at the bottom of your chat box and select panelists and attendees. So that way we can all see your comments and we can all feel connected. So take a moment now, change that setting so we can all see your chats. So tonight's event is part of the Vancouver Mural Festival's Winter Arts, which is an augmented reality exhibition that's happening across the city right now until February 28th. And it's transforming public spaces into an interactive open-air gallery. So very quickly, has anyone in the audience already seen any of these Winter Arts AR pieces? I'd love to see your comments if anyone has seen them. Yes, Jennifer has seen them, great. They're fantastic, so I encourage you, there's only 3 days left to see these. So please go out in the city, enjoy them. My colleague Jen is gonna share a link to the festival so you can see the map of where they're all located. And I want to take a second to thank the team at the Vancouver Mural Festival for partnering with the Vancouver Public Library, which is where I work, to create programming around this exhibition. So, without further ado, let's get the party started. I'm going to ask Nancy Baker Cahill to join me on stage. please, Nancy, join me. Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
Nice pillows. Nancy is an artist working at the intersection of fine art, new media, and activism. She is the founder and artistic director of Fourth Wall, which is a free augmented reality public art platform that explores resistance and inclusive creative expression. Now, some of you may have seen her very popular TED Talk from 2018 called Augmented Reality as an Artist Tool for Equity and Access. Or you may have read about her works in the New York Times or Frieze magazine or ArtNet or the Smithsonian magazine and even the Washington Post. You might also have seen that Art News included her most recent piece in their list of the Defining Public Artworks of 2020, and then in their list of the 2021 Deciders. All this to say that she's a very big deal, and it's a treat to have her with us today. And to guide the conversation today, I'm excited to introduce Natalia Lebedinskaia. So Natalia, join me on stage, please. Hi, Natalia.
Hi,
Natalia is the
Jorge.
director of creative projects for Vancouver Mural Festival. And prior to this role, Natalia was a program director at the Vancouver Biennale. And before that, she was a curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba, and one of the 7 curators for Landmarks 2017, which was a national series of contemporary art commissions, marking the 150th anniversary of Confederation in Canada's national parks. So, Natalia, take it away. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to work with VPL on this series of talks around winter arts and AR in public space, and how I really just feel very fortunate to now be talking to Nancy over this lunchtime. And Nancy was sort of a pivotal figure in my understanding of AR in public space, because at some point my former artistic director, Barry Mowat, came back from the desert and said, Desert X, there was an AR thing. AR in public art is the future. And Nancy is the one who did it. So shortly thereafter, I was introduced to Nancy at the VRAR Summit, and I had kind of no idea. And now a short few years later, I'm very happy to be talking to you and learning more about how you got into all of this, and knowing that the field is very new, how other people could get into it as well, and the potential that it carries for visibility in public space and creating connections between people and places and art. So Nancy, I believe you're going to start us off with a brief artist talk, so I'm just going to hand this over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalia. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Vancouver Public Library and Vancouver Mural Festival. It's my pleasure to be here, and I promise not to talk too long about my process and my practice, but anyway, I'm excited to share what I have. I'm just gonna pull this up, and hopefully you can see, can everybody see this, I hope? I'm gonna assume that's a yes, unless Natalia, you come on and say that you cannot. Anyway, yes, I'm just gonna talk to you a little bit really briefly about how I got here and how I came to AR specifically, and about the intersection that Jorge mentioned of fine art, digital, new media, and activism. I have always had one foot in video or some kind of video type of project installation and drawing. So really I've always been interested in marrying the most ancient art forms to the most futuristic. And drawing is really my first language and my main medium, whether I'm doing it digitally or on paper or tearing my drawings up into sculptures. But I just wanted to give you a really quick look at, you know, how this all happened. The drawing on the left was really the thing that sort of catapulted me into using virtual reality as an extension of my practice. But prior to that, I had tried so hard to create immersive environments for people interacting with the work, because at its core, my work really kind of conceptually treats the body as this intimate source of knowledge. And I'm really interested in the kind of unfixed and uncontained nature of our bodies, that they're ever changing, that they're never kind of, that they exist between extremes on so many levels. And I'm really interested in examining how we understand reality through conscious sensory engagement. So In all the work, my goal has always been to examine how embodied knowledge allows us to mediate and resist systems of oppression and control. And so I really love the way that new media allows us to really challenge understandings of consciousness first and foremost. But and I'm going to speak a little bit quickly here, just so that we can get to, I think, what you're most interested in. But I really came to this honestly. The drawing on the left was a series that I'd done based on a book that I read about, which I'll share with you at the end, written by a feminist philosopher, about her experience of sexual assault and how the trauma lived in her body. And she explained it through philosophical math. And I really wanted to kind of try and amplify and illustrate that as I understood it, because I thought it was such a beautiful metaphor for the way that trauma works and the way that the body navigates these moments. And it was when I made this piece and someone stood in front of it and said, "That's exactly how I feel," that I thought, oh, I want her to feel that more. And how can I do this? And one of my, a curator that I was talking to at the time, I had all these creative fits and starts. I just couldn't get there. You know, I tried everything in my power to make something kind of immersive using paper. And she said, well, why don't you just do it in VR? Why don't you just draw it in VR? And so that's what I did. I got my hands on some VR, on the most basic VR drawing tools. I'm sure you all know Tilt Brush, which is mercifully now and excitingly open source. So we can all develop individual, our own sort of individualized approach. But it was super, super intuitive and a real game changer for me as an artist. And so as you can see, based on the 3 graphite drawings at the top of the screen, I really went from a very, what we call analog style to, once I started drawing in VR, and I'm just going to play this video for you, and drawing in 360, which was itself an exhilarating experience, a kind of almost ecstatic experience, because of course, using this one drawing app, you're disembodied. You can't feel your body, see your body. All you can see is the trace, the marks you're making in 360. And I found that just exhilarating beyond words. But it really did start to affect my neuroanatomy and how I represented, the infinite space of white paper and velocity and mass and all of the things that so it really altered, how I draw and represent things on paper. And it's been this sort of continuous loop ever since. Those of you that know me know that I have a history of loving collaboration and working with all kinds of people to tell stories and to amplify stories. And I had this extraordinary opportunity to show the VR drawings as public art. And I leapt at the chance. This is on the Sunset Strip in LA. And it was an incredible experience. But to me, and it was, I don't have any regrets, but to me, I wanted to be able to share it even more broadly and really start to challenge what public art could be, what public art meant, and for who gets to decide what is public art and how do they get access to it. Because I think a lot about accessibility, given some of the nature of my collaborations where I've worked with people who really haven't had access to, fancy educations or a lot of exposure to museums and traditional institutions of permission. And I really wanted to engage an even more one-to-one dialogue around art and creativity and creative inclusion. So, worked with my team. I wish I had, and you'll find this out when we get into the nitty-gritty of creation. I worked with my team at Drive Studios, brilliant, fearless team, to create an augmented reality app. Because I went to them and I said, how do we share these more broadly? And they said, well, we could translate your VR drawings into augmented reality and then just invite, an unknown and unseen audience to play and to create their own context and content for the work. And that's exactly what we did. And in the earliest iteration of the app, you could walk into we photogrammetried my studio, because I also wanted to break down this idea of this sort of, hallowed, it is a hallowed space. Of course, it's a sacred space, the artist's creative space. It's also a messy space. It's a space of creativity, and I wanted to share that. And so we invited people into the studio, and you could teleport, because again, I wanted to really increase accessibility for people who were in any way unable to, were immobilized in any way. And there was a hologram originally of me talking about the conceptual underpinnings of the work, which I will spare you from seeing now. And the results when we first unleashed this in 2018 were extraordinary, and people all over the world took my VR drawings, translated into AR, and placed them in the most extraordinary places, everywhere from, you know, the baggage carousel at LAX, where I'll just on the baggage claim at LAX, but all over the world. You're looking right now at Malawi, at Berlin, and the Caribbean, London, New York, Ireland, everywhere. Not everywhere, but almost. But I had a really kind of game-changing moment in around this time, later in the year, with my dear friend and activist, artist and activist, Tanya Aganiga, who was down at the border. She does a lot of work along the border, and was in Tijuana. And she put the drawing, one of my drawings, in the United States and pulled it through the border wall into And this was just a really profound moment for me because, you know, as much as I talk about this sort of uncontained, uncontainable, unfixed nature of the body and of this extraordinary medium, using it in this way to really underscore that that this has no boundaries, that this medium has no boundaries, was deeply inspiring to me. And I began inviting other artists that I really admire and respect with deeply rigorous practices to collaborate. And I made myself the guinea pig first. I put a piece over the site of the 2017 massacre in Las Vegas, a painting that I'd done called Hurt Colors. And then again, when Justice Kavanaugh was being confirmed, a piece from my Surge series. And the beautiful part about geolocating AR and being in conversation around site specificity and idea activation is that you rely on other people to help you in this process. It's inherently collaborative. You know, I couldn't be in Washington, DC, so I relied on someone in the ground to help me with position, scale, orientation. And that's actually been in many ways as meaningful to me as anything else I've done. I worked with a number of other artists in Los Angeles. There are too many to name, literally hundreds on that. Engaging sound in the work was also really important. And I was invited to be part of a show on surveillance, and the surveillance economy is a deep and abiding obsession of mine. And so I made this very, very simple AR piece where I just did a graphite drawing of a kind of oculus, if you will, put it in the sky, and then added sound. And I think one of these, oops, and worked with my cousin to create an ASMR sound, but you know what? I don't think it's going to work here. Anyway, it's on my Instagram if you ever want to see it. It's very creepy. We blended any number of voices whispering in every single language we could think of. And so it's deeply unsettling. It's a deeply unsettling experience by design. I was then invited to create 2 monumental land artworks for Desert X, and it was really important to me that we not disrupt the sacred land of the desert in every way possible. So other than, you know, obviously people driving there and using phones, but this was really a breakthrough for me personally. I was able to really scale up the work and animate it and really create works that were in direct dialogue with the site. This piece that you're seeing now, Margin of Error, is over the Salton Sea. Revolutions was over the wind farm in Palm Springs. And I really wanted to comment on climate change and the effect of human intervention on the landscape. And that's what Natalia was referring to. In the meantime, I had 2 opportunities to really expand the scope of what we started with coordinates. I collaborated with an artist here, Deborah Scacco, on Defining Line, where we invited artists, local artists here to place their works in AR along the LA River, which is also a contested site of its own. And then, you know, more recently in October of 2019, I collaborated with Jesse Damiani to curate 24 artists and 30 artworks in New Orleans for Battlegrounds. And it remains one of my proudest moments. This is a show that invited artists, local artists, again, to speak to the concerns of their own communities around contested sites. And we asked the question, you know, what is a contested site? And the range is extraordinary. And I encourage you, if you're interested, to go to fourthwallapp.org eventually and see some of the incredible breadth of works in this exhibition as well. I was invited to do a Facebook artist in residence, and I created I had access to a 40-foot wall. So again, back to drawing and analog and the connection between, you know, just drawing on paper and engaging the digital, I wanted to make a piece about the body as this source of biometric data that is extracted and of all the things that are taken from us and projected upon us in the digital age. So I drew a bunch of dancers in moments of sort of ecstatic dance, and they're simultaneously dissolving and coagulating. But I really also wanted to not implicate, but engage the viewer's body as well, so that the viewer felt a kind of connection to these other bodies, you know, and I created the lens. Of course, each one of these dancers is in a lens, an abstracted lens, because the lens mediates so much of our lives now through our little black mirrors. But so we activated along the peak an entire wall. As we walk along the lines, literally off the wall, drawing marks, all my marking entire body. And this is the dancer. We also put the dancer outside, and I scaled her up, you know, to be in the middle of this very, you know, forgive me, but like bro techie environment. I was very fortunate over the summer to collaborate with artist Brianna Harlan, thanks to Alice Grace Deitz, who's a brilliant curator in Louisville. And Brianna teamed up with Hannah Drake, who's a spoken word poet, and got permission from Breonna Taylor's family to make She Ascends. And it's an AR monument to Breonna Taylor. And again, I don't think we have time because I'm looking at the clock, but if you want to experience this and experience the spoken word in all of its glory, I encourage you to go to the Fourth Wall app. I'm really proud of this piece, proud to and honored to have been able to host it. And it just felt to me like in many ways, the perfect use of AR to create new monuments in this moment that we're in. I was also invited by now it was almost 2 years ago, the Art Production Fund, to create a piece for Philadelphia. And I started thinking about Philadelphia and what I think of when I think of Philadelphia. And I remembered an early trip as a child to visit the Liberty Bell. And I came up with this Liberty Bell project because I started thinking, you know, in the wake of 2016 and really our entire history from the genocidal origins of the United States about this concept of liberty. And what does liberty even mean, and liberty for whom? And is it, like the Liberty Bell, just a kind of cracked system and idea, and who does it actually serve? And, you know, and we found ourselves in this moment of, and still find ourselves in a moment of, you know, radical economic inequality and structural racism and racialized violence and disinformation and voter suppression and climate change and, you know, the pandemic and police brutality and detention centers and unchecked nationalism and QAnon. I mean, we could all go on and on. We're all very aware of these things. So what does liberty mean in that moment? And what is sort of the American ideal of liberty actually mean? So this project was an invitation to consider these questions and these ideas. Not that I have any answers myself, but it's just something I think we should all grapple with, particularly as we hear this word thrown around fairly casually and weaponized on occasion. So again, back to the analog, I draw it first on paper, then drew it in VR, and then had it translated into AR. And here it is. We chose six cities that were of historic or cultural importance along the Eastern Seaboard, including Boston, the Rockaways, Washington, DC, Philadelphia, Charleston, South Carolina, and of course, Selma, Alabama. We knew this was going to come out in an election year, and Selma, of course, is so important for. In every case, we consulted with the communities where this piece was going to ask them where they felt it would be most appropriate, what their thoughts were about it, and that's also something that's super important to me, no matter where I make work, is asking and inviting conversation versus just sort of showing up and doing something. There are some places where we don't ask permission, and I'll show you those places. Anyway, here it is in DC as well. And again, you can see this on my website. I included this. I was invited by Snap to make a lens. I'm now apparently a verified lens creator. This is something I'm going to encourage a lot of you to look at. Their AR software is actually awesome, really awesome. And you can make your own lenses. And this is a piece I knew that if I had the opportunity to work with them, I really wanted to do something about climate change. So this is called Last Dance. And as you can see, the figure dissolves in, I hope, a poetic way. Toward the end of, also around the time that we launched Liberty Bell, I was invited by a couple of incredible LA artists who had engaged 80 artists across the United States to address US detention centers and the incredible human rights violations against immigrants in the United States. And they mounted this incredible skywriting campaign over July 4th weekend, but also wanted to keep some of the skywriting permanent. And so they invited me to participate and host the AR versions. And this was, again, one of the most profound experiences of my life. I think we have something like 15 AR activations, even though there are, I think, 584 detention centers. But you can also see more of these on my website. And most recently, toward the election, I was very distressed by the misinformation around the pandemic, and collaborated with Jesse Damiani to create an artwork, which we changed. And we had great collaborators in DC who would go out, on the daily and we just changed the numbers as we were, as these quotes were coming out from the White House and other news organizations, we actually contradicted them with actual facts. Another opportunity. And coming soon to LA and to South by Southwest is a piece called Legacy, which is animated in 360 as well. And it also addresses climate change and gentrification. And I know I'm way out of time, but I wanted, because this is a library hosted event, I wanted to just give a hat tip to all the books that have really sustained and fed me. And this is just a fraction of them, but each one of these, and there are a few movies in there too, and documentaries that I threw in, but each one of these books has been incredibly influential in shaping my practice. And I would just encourage everybody always to amplify and deepen your conceptual practice by listening to other, thinkers and people who tease out the difficult subjects, or the inspiring ones, or the ones that make your brain light up through books. I guess I'm old-fashioned. I love books. That's it. And you can follow me on Instagram if you want to see more. And those are the websites I just referred to. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Nancy. That was a whirlwind. You covered a lot of ground.
Man, I sped through that, but I went over, so forgive me.
No, you're totally good. Totally good. That was a lot of ground to cover. And there are a few kind of small practical questions before they get lost. And then maybe we can talk about some of the tech that people can step into to embrace this, if they want to embrace this as part of their practice or the practice of people they work with. So Cynthia and Redux are wondering about how you made the reflections or with the Liberty Bell.
Oh,
it reflects in the water, and more generally, the thought that goes into integrating the AR with the space that it's in, and how much of that is your is part of your practice.
Okay, those are two great questions. The first one, I work with a team, as you know, and one of the things that became very important to me when I knew that we could engage the location of the sun to cast shadows. We also, actually now all the dimensional drawings in the app cast shadows as well. It was really important to me because when you're playing with this layering of reality, I wanted it to occupy, I didn't want it just to look like a mirror layer. I wanted it to actually occupy space and give the illusion of mass. And of course, shadows allow that to happen. And I just think that it, again, kind of contextualizes it as an object, as a sculpture in space, versus just this sort of singular shallow layer. Although the singular shallow layers are also amazing. And to me, as long as the content is really compelling, it doesn't matter if it's a PNG and it's flat, or if it's as, rich and textured and data hoggy as Liberty Bell. Or if the ideas are sound, then it's great. And I actually like the glitchy things that are sort of here for a second and gone. One thing I didn't mention that I love about AR is the kind of ghost thing that happens when, and I'm going to get back to the other part of the question because it's so good, but I forgot to say this, which is to say that when you experience an AR artwork in space, particularly at a site that is like say Salton Sea or over the LA River or wherever it is, or in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, once it's made the impact on you, you really never forget it. And so it kind of occupies that in-between space, that non-space of memory and of, or whatever you want, of consciousness every time you go back. And I think that's also part of its inherent power and opportunity. But as for how it's integrated into the environment, I take that all, incredibly seriously. To me, if you're going to take that liberty actually to place an artwork in space, it has to be in direct conversation, both to the community it serves and to the landscape itself. I've never just sort of like, as I say, like just sort of plunked something down. So I take, color, lighting, composition, all those, very formal concerns, actually. The formal concerns of any artist are all come into play as well, of course.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the magic between the really obviously formal, like you're a painter, you draw, and then moving that into public art without making it into a physical sculpture. I think there is some magic that happens in there. And this non-space of memory and layering in AR is like going to stick with me forever. Thank you for that. That's really brilliant, because I'm really interested in kind of what is absent in the space but still is there in a way, like kind of the palimpsest that cities or places are. So the idea of being able to shift that through AR is extremely interesting to me. The other question was, what was the name of the artist who you worked with in Tijuana?
Tanya Aguiniga.
Okay, I'll do.
Yeah, it's Aguiniga, actually. Yeah, Aguiniga, I think. I hope I got that right.
Okay, I will. Maybe Jen will find it.
Yeah, Tanya's work is extraordinary.
Yeah, because that was a really interesting project as well. Oh, there you go, Jen. Oh, Jorge found her. There you go. So I'm wondering, in terms of tech, is like how, because you mentioned a couple of things in passing, like Snapchat and Spark. Spark is what we ended up using for VMF Winter Arts. So wondering if you have any experience to share on the tech side.
Yeah, I mean, because we end up actually mixing or producing most of my work in Unity, which is a gaming engine. Unity and Unreal are obviously the big ones. I love Unity just because I feel like it affords a lot of freedom. One of the things that really I kind of like came up against with the drawing apps is the drawing presets. And so in all my drawings, I've always used my own brush strokes, but that means more production. That means more intervention down the line. But if you want to just like start getting into it, yes, I would say Spark AR, obviously Lens Studio, which I highly recommend. Adobe Aero is also a great tool if you're already in sort of like Adobe family and you're fluent in that language. It's excellent. It's actually AERO. The other thing that I just heard about yesterday in a Clubhouse chat was called AR.js. No idea if it's good. I can't recommend it. Never seen it, but somebody mentioned it. And, I think that these tools are only going to continue to kind of explode. And the ones that will, will survive are the ones that are most user-friendly. And, even with some 3D modeling softwares, there are so many tutorials available. And they want people to use them. These are incredible tools. And the one thing I will say is I do, and this is maybe not the time and place, but I do think that when we engage with technology, we always have to have a kind of not a jaundiced eye, but a critical eye on the impact of the technologies, not just on how we use them in the world, but also on the environment and on each other, like, because a lot of maybe not so much in the AR arena, but certainly in VR, there are a lot of There's still a lot of biometric data being collected, and I just think it's something to always be aware of, that they're very powerful tools, and when we use them subversively, or we use them for good, or we use them to make beauty, it's all wonderful, but that they're not uncomplicated as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually like a key part of keeping in mind as well in terms of getting started in the technology, especially one that is so incredibly seductive as AR and VR is, and is extremely accessible just because there is, tutorials and learning to do filters and whatnot. But what is it, kind of what is behind that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's totally the time and the place for that.
What is behind that is a good question. There's a lot behind it.
Like Facebook, I'm very curious about Spark because it is kind of right there. And obviously it's like kind of training us to do things in terms of filters. And that was very interesting for us to use Spark as part of VMF Winter Arts, and really push the boundaries of what it was made to do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, that's really exciting. I know the same thing was true for Snap. They were like, you almost broke it, but we should keep pushing. I just joined the XRSI safety initiative, which is an XR safety initiative led by the cybersecurity expert Kavya Perlman, because this is so important to me, actually, these issues. And if you follow them on Twitter or whatever, they're always putting out updates regarding different types of hardware, types of software and apps that maybe are hackable and maybe putting your identity at risk, things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just shared the XRSI link as well in the chat. I'm trying to like share the links at the same time as we're talking here. So the AR and world integration, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the community process, like the community engagement process that you go through with your projects. And it can be like case studies or examples or past experiences that are particularly potent in that, because I think there's a lot of possibility of that layering of history and exclusion. So
yeah. No, I think that the key in any type of engagement is to approach it with curiosity and with a willingness to just listen and be sensitive to whatever the needs of that community are and what they feel is best for their community. It couldn't be more repellent, right? To be this particularly white person of privilege coming in and saying, I'm going to do this. Isn't it great? That's not how I approach any of my projects. And I don't think that anyone would ever want to collaborate with me if I did. So I, generally just believe that if we invite conversation, most people are kind of excited to share and to tell the stories that either haven't been told. I mean, one of the things that was really powerful in New Orleans certainly was, God, there were so many examples of this, where there would be certain locations that had, like for example, in the Lower Ninth Ward, where the Hurricane Katrina had just completely decimated it. It was getting gentrified, and it was really important to the two of the artists that I worked with, their legends, Sean McCormick and Keith Calhoun, to remember to use the AR as a form of memory and marking and historical marking of what mattered and continues to matter to the community. Which in one case that I'm thinking of, there was just like a grassy lot, overgrown, and it had been the site of this incredible church that was like a source of community strength, and it had been vilified by a lot of white churches as like being dismissed as black magic and voodoo or whatever, but it was really the anchor and the social center and therapeutic center of the community, and it was just destroyed. And of course, in a community that doesn't have a lot of resources, these things don't get rebuilt. But it was crucial to that history. And so by putting the one of their beautiful photographs of that piece over that lot, it kind of lives there. And it lives there again as a reminder.
Yeah, that process of memorialization and who has access to the creation of monuments and who doesn't, and therefore what monuments are created. And then now, I guess, especially following last year, which monuments are torn down and like graffitied over, and how that anti-monument functions is really like, I think AR is a very natural fit into that conversation.
It really is, and I think inviting people to create their own monuments, that are meaningful to them is really important. We just actually did. I forgot to put it in the. I can't believe I forgot to put it in here, but we just did a monument to Artsakh, the people of Artsakh, because of the genocide that's going on there, and we have a huge Armenian community here, and beautiful trio of Armenian artists put together this piece, and we hosted it, and I'm deeply proud of that as well. And for their community, that meant a lot, to be able to look to that and say, well, we remember, and this is important to us, and this means something to us, and we may not be commissioned to put a big, slab of concrete and big expensive sculpture, but we can still memorialize it in other ways.
Yeah, and then it's also less fixed. Like it kind of. I saw you had the Susan Sontag book in your books, and she's I come from a photo theory background, so she's sort of my great light. And thinking about how like photographs are objects of memory, but the memory is actually an oral practice.
Totally.
Like I think AR is much closer to that path.
I could not agree more. And it's as ephemeral and as mediated by the people experiencing it, that there is no singular truth.
Yeah. And it's also a very intimate experience with the phone, which I feel like really ties into that question of embodiment that you were talking about. There was one more technical question in the chat, so I'm going to read that one out to you. And okay, this is from Earl. I'm a First Nations artist developer, and I really enjoy manual tools that allow for physical shaping, such as tilt brush, but I also enjoy the technical coding that alongside the creation. Do you have experience view on that approach?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm so impressed. I most recently someone said, because I've been struggling with, it's very limiting not to actually have at least a basic understanding of code. I mean, I learned a little bit of Python, but in one ear out the other. But I know that, for example, Unity has I think it's called spatial coding, where you don't actually have to use C#. You can actually work with nodes. And for visual people, this is a different, and I think somewhat more accessible way in to that conversation. So yeah, I'm with you. I love Tilt Brush too. It served me very well, but I always come up against what I feel like are the limitations. And there are other really great drawing tools. Now they're going to just explode because of course it's open source, but Quill is one. I really love Anim VR. I think it's very intuitive. If anybody wants to try that, it's not a big name, app, but I just made 2 massive pieces for a biennial next year using that, and it was a wonderful experience. And you can just do more with opacity. I'm getting geeky here, but you can really play with opacity and texture a little bit more. And you really can't play with opacity in the same way in Tilt Brush. So each one of these drawing apps has its own strengths and foibles. I did hear that Blender's coming out, which was the 3D modeling. They're coming out with a drawing tool, which is going to be a VR drawing tool, which is going to stop the presses. It's going to be amazing, I think. And some of the mark making felt more, for lack of a better word, fine arty to me. Yeah, I could geek out on that for hours.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, the same way that I love studio visits, this is kind of tugging at that part of. There was another question from Ify. I'm gonna say that wrong. I always get that name wrong. Aoife. There you go. How do you usually reach out to the communities that you wish to work in?
I have, to be honest, I've never done like a cold outreach. Part of being a maybe insanely extroverted person is I tend to meet a lot of people and always love expanding my network. So I'm fortunate enough to know people in a lot of places, and generally I start with a trusted friend or colleague or associate or friend of a friend, and work inward from there. I rarely go through institutions. I usually go through different people and then try and find the community leaders in those spaces.
Yeah, that's always been my approach as well, is
people
kind of that meandering.
Yeah.
that meandering inwards. I am looking for the other question, which was, what do you use for mapping VR on site? That's a question from Carolina.
Mapping VR, I've never really mapped VR. If you mean like, how do we situate the AR? I use geolocation generally. That's for any of the sort of the works that have to do with a very specific location on Earth, or in time space. The VR translated AR drawings quote assets in the app you can put anywhere, anytime. The one thing I have done image recognition. So the wall that I showed you of analog drawings, the lens drawings, that is, I think if I could do that everywhere, I probably would, because it's much more stable. So it really triggers a very like one-to-one, very, very precise experience. On the other hand, I like sometimes the unwieldiness of a geolocation because it gets back at that unfixed thing that you can't actually hold on to it. It bounces around sometimes. You have to be prepared for that. I think I always have to manage expectations. Like sometimes it's going to be exactly where it should be. Other times it could be over there behind the tree. It could show up this bit, it's a very finicky beast, but I also think that's part of its opportunity conceptually.
Carolina, did this answer your question? Because she was saying that it's a question of projection of the artwork on spaces, but I think that like insertion.
I think she meant location. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize that this was as much a challenge as it was until listening to a panel recently and how they actually like take an extensive number of photographs that are then amalgamated into a space that then help the AR object sit where it needs to be. And that creates a really stable object.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, she means like the exhibitions where you're surrounded by AR. So like more, I guess, tracker-based work where, yeah. Yeah, she has been in New York at one last year.
Yeah, I don't, I'm not sure I know. I don't know which one she went to, but oh, an underwater world. Well, that would my guess is that was probably an installation, and they probably used tracking. That sounds like it sounds like an installation piece that would probably used image recognition.
Like a combination of like image recognition and
what you can do with installations now is amazing. I mean, that's sort of one of the arenas I'm moving into now is actually combining all of these things at once. But certainly when you're talking about public space, at least, that's when geolocation is really most relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I see. Carolina, so this wasn't, I guess, VR or AR, it was just like really complex projection mapping.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I'm actually getting projection mapping now as myself, and it is addictive. It is almost as addictive as drawing in VR. It's projection mapping. Yeah. I mean, with projection mapping, I'm about to do a project here in downtown LA where we're going to project onto the sides of buildings, and you can make incredibly immersive experiences in private and in public. That's another whole frontier, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, and then intersecting all of them into one.
Yeah, and then combining. Yeah, it's amazing. It's totally amazing.
Yeah, it's total magic.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there are any other questions from the chat. Just gonna look through. I think I've covered off the ones that people have asked. So if people have other ones, please feel free. In the fourth wall, there is a search for artwork section. Does this activate from image markets?
Oh, that
markers.
If you're getting that message, if you've tapped the coordinates button, it's probably because I'm not sure where you are in the world, but it probably means I don't have a geolocated piece close enough to you to show up. yeah, on the website, we have maps of where everything is. But yes, searching for artwork is usually just the phone trying to locate the asset. And sometimes that actually also shows up. This is something that I always have to tell people, you know, is that when you download the app, and by the way, PS, we just optimized the app again, and we have a new update on the App Store. So, you know, on Google Play and on the App Store. So if you want to get the latest and greatest, it's ready. But you know, I always try and tell people that you have to allow all permissions, because otherwise you won't be able to take pictures. GPS won't be able to find you. You know, this kind of thing. You don't really need GPS to do the dimensionals, but for the other stuff you do. And it's always something that I think bears repeating too, that I don't collect any user data. Back to the you know, surveillance issue. So, you know, even if you're, you know, if someone else is looking for you, I can't control that, but I'm not looking for you. I just want you to enjoy it and to play with it.
Yeah. Aaron is curious about the permanence of the work in VR AR. He says, I don't feel, I don't spend as much time on VR work. Is this something that you faced in the early days? And does the value grow over time? It's actually a really
wonderful question.
Yeah.
A wonderful question. And it's something that we're all talking about right now a lot, not just in terms of like preservation, which has always been an ongoing conversation with any digital work. But, you know, it's interesting. I think VR has yet to have its like real day. I think it's amazing. And as it becomes more accessible, that will be more, that, you know, will be the case more and more. And, you know, with like multiplayer and social VR now, where you can go into hubs from a desktop, I think it's becoming, you know, increasingly accessible. I do think like one of my favorite VR experiences, speaking of value, because, you know, there's a lot of talk about NFTs. We didn't even get into that, but, you know, one of my favorite experiences in VR is actually one of the most crude and old, and it has to do with the gaze, and it has to do with like making you aware of how your gaze can be a kind of a small violence, and things like that are just conceptually really, really compelling and executed sometimes with very, very simple technology. I think, you know, can be every bit as valuable as the flashiest, most expensive production. You know, to me, again, it always comes back to the ideas. So if the ideas aren't compelling, you know, you're not going to want to do it. If the ideas are compelling, you will. And so I personally think that we're just at the beginning of extraordinary storytelling that's coming. I don't know if you were able to experience any of Sundance or New Frontiers this year, but, you know, there's just, people are really pushing what's possible. And I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's really, it's a very exciting time for this. So we have time for one more question. And I will wait for it for a couple of seconds. And if not, I will ask you about the NFTs.
Oh, that's a whole other panel.
I know. We did a 5-day conference about NFTs with the Caribbean Alley previously. So yes, Mike does want to know about NFTs. So very cursorily, NFT, for those people who do not know what that stands for, it stands for non-fungible tokens. And now over to you, Nancy, as to what you think about that and the blockchain.
I think that for a lot of artists, it presents a really extraordinary opportunity, not only to have more autonomy and agency over our work, but to ensure that we basically get paid in ways that we, you know, where because of the way that blockchain works and because, you know, of consensus algorithms and accountability, you don't have to worry if you write in this idea of smart contracts, when you write into the contract what your percentage is and then what your percentage is in the secondary market. These are really compelling things, and they're also compelling because they market as yours in time. It's a kind of like serial. The way I love having it described is this kind of a serial number that's assigned to you, which cannot be reproduced. I mean, you can do additions, but it can't be, you know, forged essentially, or stolen. And I think it's an extremely interesting moment. I think it's definitely a gold rush moment. I think the thing that I wish were being more discussed is something that my friend Memo brought up. He wrote he kind of dropped this bomb on Twitter. But, you know, the environmental impact of mining is not to be underestimated. And until ETH2 comes out, which is a more eco-friendly system of accountability and you know, data exchange, I think, you know, we have to be really mindful of how we engage the platforms and how much we do on those platforms. So that's just my own personal take on it. If you read about it, it's pretty devastating.
Yeah, Carolina is also mentioning how like the current gold rush and the price surges have led to minting fees being really, really expensive. How like she tried to mint something, it's like $120. That is way too much. And how like the gas prices have gone way up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a very, it's a complex territory right now to, I think, navigate, and a lot of people are wanting to get into it, but
and there's a lot to recommend it, and there are a lot of ways I think it could even be engaged conceptually that could be really interesting. But at the end of the day, right, like you don't want to be exploited further. The whole point is to be less exploited, you know, and to broaden your audience and to participate in something that is abstract but also protect, you know, possibly remunerative. So yeah.
Aaron says, can't thank you guys for the absolute wealth of knowledge. And that is an excellent point to wrap up on. So I'm going to hand things over back to Jorge. And thank you again so much for hosting and for keeping us on time. And to everyone who has asked questions and participated in the chat. Over to you, Jorge.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia and Nancy, for this wonderful conversation, for sharing all these ideas, all the wealth of knowledge, as someone mentioned in the chat. It's been wonderful to listen and to learn. We really are in an age of frontier and a lot of change, as Nancy mentioned. So thanks for being with us tonight. We're going to say goodbye to you now, and I'm going to do some closing remarks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So thanks everyone who joined us online today. Thanks to my colleague Jen, who in the chat was helping run things smoothly. And thank you all of you who asked questions and participated in the conversation. If you like this event, I encourage you to follow the Vancouver Public Library's Facebook page, where we post some of our best events there, and you'll find out about everything that's upcoming. And if you enjoyed this event, or if you didn't, we'd like to hear your feedback. We're a public institution, so our job is to do programs that work for you. So your feedback is very important, so we can keep getting better at these programming initiatives. So my colleague Jen is going to share the link to a quick form. It'll take you about a minute to fill out, so it'll be very important for us to hear what you thought about tonight's event, or today's event. On that note, speaking of tonight, I want to tell you about an event that's coming up at 7 p.m. Vancouver time. It's to celebrate Black History Month, and we're hosting a performance and a conversation with an award-winning musician called Carrie Wendell McClellan. And he's going to be performing the music that freed slaves brought to Canada as they fled slavery in the US. So that's going to be incredible. It's at 7 p.m. tonight. You don't want to miss it. And Jen's going to add the link to the chat. So that's it for me. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to do the awkward wave and disappear slowly. We're going to keep this open for a few minutes just so that you can go through the chat and click on the links and connect with each other. So don't worry about it. It's not going to disappear for another 5 minutes. There's going to be a slide, and that'll be it. So thank you all for coming. See you later.